Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I have just recently finished rereading The Painted Veil by Somerset Maugham, and this is a book I first read back in February 2020, so almost 6 years ago. Well, really, yeah, nearly 6 years ago to the day. I don't remember exactly when I finished it, but it's really interesting to think about what life was like back then and what it's like now. And I think the fact that we were on the brink of the pandemic, especially where I lived in the Pacific Northwest at the time, that experience really made those 6 years a lot longer than they would otherwise have seemed or felt. I was living with my parents and younger siblings at the time, and I was making YouTube videos in the very early days of the channel. I think my review of this book was like number 15 or 16 in my list of videos. And I had also just started a brand new job and was trying to get my life together and meet new people. And as you can imagine, it was sort of a very bad time, you might think, to be doing those things. But I personally feel like God really used that time to really help me grow and sort of help me grow in spite of the odds. Today I have over 250 videos on my channel, and I just started a new job in my new country. I'm living in the UK, and I have been married for almost a year, which is a miracle in itself, and I don't use that word lightly. So yeah, lots of changes in those years, and I was really keen to read this again because of what an impression it left on me at the time. And I went back and listened to my 2020 review, and honestly, many of my thoughts remain the same. It's just amazing, though, how a little more life experience can alter your perception of characters, and yet, at the same time, I have to say this book still captivated me and touched me deeply, so that even the things that were a little different this time around just fascinated me from a new angle. So that's the beauty of Maugham's writing, and not just the beauty of his prose, but the beauty of his craft and technique as well. He has to be quite a powerful writer indeed, because both times I felt this interesting connection to the main character, who starts out as Kitty Garston. Kitty is a party girl, a flirt, and a social climber. Things I'm not really at all interested in or familiar with at all. She is extremely beautiful and spoiled by her mother. Mrs. Garston wants for her daughter not a good marriage, but a brilliant marriage. So Kitty reaches her mid-late 20s, and she's still not married. She still hasn't made that brilliant match that her mother wishes for her, or rather for herself, because this is all about Mrs. Garston. And, you know, even though Kitty is attractive and has had many proposals, she just hasn't found the one. She's always been holding off for somebody better, somebody more worthy of her mother's approval. And yet her mother is starting to increase the pressure and tell her, just pick the first suitable person, because her younger sister is about to get married to someone very, notable. I think a baronet or something like that. So Kitty's reaching her mid-late 20s, and she can't bear to be a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding. It's just so humiliating for her. And she meets Walter Fane, and Walter is this socially awkward bacteriologist. I hope I said that right. A scientist, basically, who seems to have this big crush on Kitty. And, she doesn't like Walter very much. He's not her type at all. But she's faced with this dilemma, and it seems like it might be very convenient to marry Walter if he should propose to her. And she also finds out that Walter is going to be returning to Hong Kong very soon. That is where he works. And it's obviously very far away from England, from her mother, and from all of this drama going on with her sister's wedding. So, Walter does end up proposing to Kitty, and she does end up accepting him. It seems like a convenient way out in the moment. So they move to Hong Kong, and things start out, not well, but relatively smoothly as she settles into society there. But she soon realizes that even in Hong Kong, being the wife of a scientist isn't actually all that prestigious. And like her mother and her mother's discontent with her father's status, Kitty grows discontent with her husband's status. And stuff really hits the fan when she meets Charlie Townsend. Charlie is one of the prominent British officials in the colony, and he's everything Walter is not. He's older, athletic, and charismatic as a Hollywood star. So they begin this lengthy affair, which is eventually discovered by Walter. And that's not a spoiler. I mean, I think that's pretty much on the blurb of every book, and it really sets off the rest of the novel. Walter gives Kitty two choices: either divorce him and get married to Charlie and get out of his life immediately, or Kitty must accompany Walter into a country village, a village called Mayfuntu. And that's where he is going to fight a cholera epidemic. So last time in my previous review, I focused a lot on the characters, the dynamic between them, how they draw out different angles of each other. I talked a lot about themes of redemption and reconciliation and some very strong Christian parallels that surprised me a lot. And I'm not going to go into that as much here. I think, I still stand by most of what I said in the previous video, and if you're interested, do check it out. What I wanted to talk about today was more along the lines of structural and societal themes. This ties in really well with The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which I read earlier, kind of over, I think, Christmas, holidays. In the way Anne Bronte in that novel showed how groups of people, even small groups, heavily influence the behavior of any individual among them. And she did a really good job of showing how, people do fall into that herd mentality, and so that any seemingly minor problems they have in their character when they're alone can be really amplified, even egged on, if they're with the wrong companions and making the wrong friends. And you see a bit of that sort of structural, systemic vices in this book, The Painted Veil. And it really starts from the very beginning with Mrs. Garston. Now, I did notice the character of Mrs. Garston in my first reading, but I was so struck by the description of her in the second reading. She is really the epitome of covetousness and social climbing. Maugham describes her as, quote, hard, cruel, managing, ambitious, parsimonious, and stupid. There's some very, very strong words, and I think the one that really grabbed me the most was cruel. And how is Mrs. Garston cruel? Well, it manifests in three ways. One, Mrs. Garston is tyrannical in her marriage. She exerts this nagging control over her husband and his career, and constantly telling him if he's not good enough for her or not doing enough. In the second way she is cruel is towards her younger daughter, and her younger daughter is plain and doesn't seem to have any prospects, which is ironic because she's the one that makes the first brilliant marriage. But she's not very nice to that daughter, at least she doesn't give as much to that daughter. The third way that Mrs. Garston is cruel is in the way she panders to Kitty, spoils Kitty, really, and really creates an environment in which Kitty turns out very self-centered and hedonistic. But what struck me too during this reading is not that Mrs. Garston is painted, if you will. I'm not trying to be punny here. She's not painted as a unique villain of her place or time, but rather as a type of person. Kitty, her daughter, describes herself later as a type of woman. Kitty tells Walter, quote, I was silly and frivolous and vulgar when you married me. I was brought up like that. All the girls I know are like that. So what Mom is doing here is showing us some very vivid character portraits, but carefully pointing out that this is not just limited to a few unpleasant people living their, isolated, unpleasant lives, but rather they're part of these systems of people, these networks, where everyone behaves in a similar way, is raised in these similar ways, and are, climbing the social ladder in very similar, grasping ways. Maugham gives you the sense that each character is embedded in some particular circle or web, and in Hong Kong, those British socialites are a miniature representation of English society back home. They are carefully sequestered off from the locals and lower classes. So, interestingly enough, though, Kitty, even though she's not lower class per se, she experiences the same sorts of class frustrations that she might have felt if she had been back in England. But in some ways it's worse because she's in this smaller community. The differences between people become more obvious. The contrast is greater. It's harder to escape. And there are just fewer people for her to associate with as a result. And Dorothy Townsend, who is Charlie's steady wife, Charlie the womanizer, Dorothy is self-conscious about her upper status, if you will. She is very self-conscious that she is morally better than Kitty, and doesn't conceal that very much. Even the Mother Superior at the convent in Mayfun 2, the country village, even this lead nun at the convent impresses Kitty with her noble French heritage. So themes of class and how that influences the way people behave and treat each other is really, really prominent in this novel. I noticed it so much this time around. And just going back to these ideas of systems of people creating problems, just as Mrs. Garstin creates this world in which Kitty grows up to be a horrible person, British colonialism creates this environment where men like Charlie Townsend can succeed and distinguish themselves. He is popular and capable. He gets stuff done. He's like this stereotypical macho guy. He's kind of checking all the boxes in that way, but he's not honorable, he's not good, and he is very selfish. And it's known to various people, including his wife, Dorothy, that he is a womanizer, but there's no real way in which Charlie is held to account, so he just continues in his predatory behavior, and we'll get to more of that later. And I think, too, that Kitty and Charlie are showing both sides of this colonial behavior and mindset. Charlie is overtly aggressive. He is covetous, rapacious, and flippant. He just kind of throws people away when he's done with them. Kitty's crime is one of omission. She is thoughtless, willfully ignorant, and self-serving. When she's on this journey to the country village, she is carried in a covered chair on the shoulders of peasants, and she just it doesn't register with her. She isn't even thinking about them. She's just wallowing in self-pity. So while she's not that aggressive type like Charlie, you can see how, because she just doesn't care, she just doesn't see, it also creates harm. And, sorry, I'm getting really passionate here. These little pencils are flying. Yeah, and I think, too, that it takes a long time for her to start caring, because there's been this distance, mental and geographical, between her and the colonies that support her lifestyle. She starts out obviously in England, then she gets a little closer by going to Hong Kong, and then she finally gets to Mayfun 2, where the epidemic is raging, and it still takes her time though when she gets here to connect with the real world and the situation as it really is. And I'm saying all these things about colonialism. It's worth noting that I don't think any of the characters really confront that, but I think that you can see very clear allusions to it in the book, as personified by Charlie and Kitty. Yeah, and so Kitty does eventually find reality and spiritual meaning in the countryside, and but when she's in Hong Kong, she gets pulled into Charlie's web and the web of the people that enable him to act the way he does. So I'm not going to go into, again, the spiritual themes as much. I did want to touch a little bit on some different interpretations I had this time. And so there is a little bit of spiritual commentary here, religious commentary. I'm also going to share some pretty big end spoilers here. So if you don't want any end spoilers, then please feel free to stop the video. And feel free, of course, to comment on anything you heard earlier. But yeah, so last time I read the book, I saw some pretty strong parallels between Walter and the character of Jesus. I say the character of Jesus. What I mean is the role that Jesus plays in the Gospels, right? Now, I don't see those parallels as strongly this time. I think Walter comes across as a very foolish, bitter, and self-righteous man. And I think the way Walter is similar to Jesus is how Samson from the Old Testament is similar to Jesus. Samson who, gets duped by Delilah and later takes down all the Philistines in a moment of rage as he pulls down the pillars in their party hall. Not of his own strength, of course, but God enables him to do that. But I'm saying this because I think Walter's more of a Samson than a Jesus. They both play these similar redemptive roles in these tales, but neither Walter nor Samson is a Christ-like figure, really. And I think it was so much easier for me to understand in this reading why Kitty disliked Walter so much. It's one thing if someone has a self-deprecating sense of humor, but Walter is just self-deprecating in love as well. Like he has a very low opinion of himself right from day one when he feels like he can't do better than marrying Kitty. And it's just not attractive at all. He also enters his marriage with this unrealistic view of Kitty. He takes what he sees, her physical beauty, and just kind of expects her to behave in a beautiful way, but he acts shocked when she continues to behave the same as she always did. And so, his death, when it comes, is so much more tragic because he is still bitter about all this, and has not been able to come to terms with his mistake in their failed marriage. Something else I'll just note, which is not a religious commentary, but the relationship between Charlie and Kitty was also interesting to reread. And it seemed so much clearer to me this time that Charlie was a predator as much as anything. Towards the end of the book, Kitty meets him again, and he effectively forces himself on her. She does not consent to his advances. He takes advantage of her in a moment of isolation. And Maugham gives us this very twisted Freudian interpretation. He describes Kitty's feelings in this moment as of a child that has been lost when she's feeling Charlie's pseudo-protective embrace. And in my previous review, I talked about how Kitty finds the beginnings of peace when she truly regrets her past actions and her association with Charlie and seeks reconciliation with her father. So again, I talked a lot about that in the last video. Won't go into it here, but I still see that in the book. Those are just a couple points of difference from my last reading. There's so much more I could say about this novel. And one thing that really did jump out to me was just the fact that this trip they take to the countryside and their life there just spans like a few weeks. And you just are left wondering what would have happened if Walter had lived. Would he and Kitty have managed to become friends? Would they have been able to stay companions, like some of the relationships of other characters in the book? Would they have grown to love each other over time and in taking care of their child? Or was it necessary in this really twisted way for him to die, this sudden and horrible death? Was that really the catalyst in Kitty's change of heart? And Maugham doesn't attempt to answer all these questions. He just throws them out there. He just leaves it with you to think about and to go away with. And I think it is a very realistic book on many levels. He just doesn't want to give you a tidy ending because that's just not how life works. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. I think the real tragedy of the book is how Walter remains untouched. And just, there's no real change in Walter, even though there's this magnificent change in Kitty. And because we don't see, like, there's no sequel, there's no extended portrayal of the dynamic between Walter and Kitty. Their dynamics are actually pretty few and sparse and negative. Maugham is focusing very tightly on the mistakes of individuals and societies in this book in a small moment in time, and he's focusing very much on the way in which generational abuses and selfishnesses come about and how those cycles get broken or can be broken. And he also, spends a lot of time talking about how the power of the Catholic nuns' faith, which is so visible in their daily lives and sacrifice, just changes Kitty's life forever. Again, very striking because Maugham was an atheist. So, the book really is very focused, it's very tight, it's so well written because it just leaves this landscape of things for you to think about, but it really just tries to stay focused on these core ideas. But yeah, I think, again, it is painful to think that Walter dies much as he lived and not in a very positive way. One of the other readers in the book club that I was reading this in said, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but when the illusions of life were removed, Walter struggled. He just couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle that he lost his vision of Kitty as this, beautiful, virtuous woman. And yet when those illusions of life were gone, Kitty found herself finally. She found hope. And it was really important for her to get out of the city and everything the city represents and to come face to face with suffering of other people. And I'll just read the poem that the title comes from, The Painted Veil. This is by Shelley. And you can really think about especially the character of Walter as being represented in this poem. Lift not the painted veil which those who live call life, though unreal shapes be pictured there, and it but mimic all we would believe, with colours idly spread. Behind lurk fear and hope, twin destinies, who ever weave their shadows o'er the chasm sightless and drear. I knew one who had lifted it. He sought, for his lost heart was tender, things to love, but found them not. Alas, nor was there aught the world contains, the which he could approve. Through the unheeding many he did move, a splendour among shadows, a bright blot upon this gloomy scene, a spirit that strove for truth, and like the preacher, found it not.